Today is the 27th of May, 2024, and I'm very excited to have the first of a series of Archives in Conversation with Dr. Angela Bea Lewkowicz, Director of the AGR of the Association of Jewish Refugees, and also the project lead on the Holocaust Testimonies UK portal. So thank you, Angela, for coming to talk to me today. And maybe just first of all to say thank you so much to Gathering the Voices for partnering in our project, a Holocaust Testimony UK portal. So thank you.
A pleasure.
Angela, could you maybe tell us a little bit about the history of?
Absolutely. Roughly comprised of there are 6 of us, and we are all trustees of the charity, the Gathering the Voices Association. And we are all volunteers with the Association of Jewish Refugees, and we happen to be based in Glasgow, Scotland. And the 3 men are all second generation. My husband's mother came from Vienna, and Howard's mother came from Hungary, and Stephen's father and mother came from Germany. And my mother-in-law had passed away, and before she passed away, she said, you know, nobody ever asked me about what I did when I came to Scotland. It was always about what happened to me and what happened to my parents. And nobody, I think she felt that no one really kind of regarded her as a person in her own right. And she said, I have contributed to society. And we thought, yes, you're right. Nobody's actually ever asked these people that have come. So we spoke to the first generation who were still attending when we kind of met up for coffees and speakers and whatever, and said, would you be willing to be interviewed and tell us what you did? And some people, for example, I know you've interviewed late John Civic Sharp. He said, well, yeah, that'd be quite nice, you know, because I was awarded the Siebert Medal and I founded the Department of Virology at University of Glasgow. And we said, oh, right, okay.
And just show it, which year was that, please?
The year that he was awarded the Siebert Medal.
No, when you started having these initial conversations.
Started all of this in 2012. So at the time, I was a senior lecturer in Glasgow Caledonian University. And so I was also a member of the local interfaith committee. I'd been a member of it for quite a number of years, and said to people, we're thinking of doing interviews. And so Glasgow Caledonian University said, oh, well, we've got all these digital recorders and we're thinking of just chucking them out. Would you like them? We've got about 40 of them. And we said, oh, that'd be great. So we were donated 40 digital tape recorders. And then somebody on the Interfaith Council said, well, what are you going to do once you've done the interviews? And I said, oh, don't know, we'll kind of just put them out there. And she said, well, you might want to have a chat with a good friend of mine who is the head, Duncan Cameron, the head of Riverside Studios, which is the top recording studios in Scotland. So I thought, oh, well, why not? So I went to have a chat with him, and he said, well, if you're going to do audio recording, you need to have it edited properly. I'll do it for you. Because he thought, bless him, that there would just be a couple of interviews. So said that was great. And also Sense Over Secretarianism gave us a grant of £10,000 to kickstart it, because we decided we were going to put everything up digital. And I happened to be, my job in Glasgow Caledonian University was I supported students in their critical reading and critical writing. And I worked with staff, PhD students, all the way down to first year. And when I joined, I worked across the university, but I know you won't be surprised, Bea, they regarded our small team as being a bit bolshy, so they divided us up. And because I'd been doing a research project with construction, they decided that I should go into the School of Engineering, Computing and Design and built natural and built environment. I know nothing about these subjects. But it gave me access to all the people on the computing side who said, oh, right, if you're going to do a website, these are the kind of things that you have to do. So we were given a lot of informal support at the university, so much so later on in one of our aspects, we've done digital comics in it. I said that someone said at the university, don't stop and talk to Angela, because within 5 minutes, you find you're agreeing to do something that you had no intentions of doing. So
yeah, can I just come back? So does it mean, so from the beginning, you were also thinking of how to disseminate? So you didn't only want to interview, you were also thinking of how to disseminate the interview?
Because from the beginning, the people we interviewed said, we want people to hear our testimonies. And they also said, we want you to promise that you don't charge. And we said, absolutely. And they also said that they wanted control of what they'd put up, because some people said that they had been interviewed and they showed me cuttings that appeared in the papers, and they said, that's not what I said. They changed it, to suit the format. So we agreed on all this. And we also set out a kind of aspects of questions that we would cover.
Okay.
And initially we thought we would invite everybody in who came to the AGR meetings to a session in the local synagogue. And other volunteers from the Jewish community said, yep, we'll come and we'll divide up in the synagogue in different rooms and carry out interviews. Most of these we didn't use because the interviewees didn't feel comfortable, and it was too formal an environment. So some of them we have used actually, and they are in the website. But we decided that we would interview people at home, in their own homes. And people said that they felt much more comfortable with that. And so that actually took a long time to do.
Yeah.
So we'd go around to individuals' houses, and that actually was quite amusing as well, because some of the people we interviewed, it became a bit of a competition on, I hear you had cake at so-and-so's house. I have made you this. So we would be there for the whole afternoon. And what we did was 2 of us interviewed the individual, and sometimes their family members joined in as well.
And was it audio or video?
We only used audio.
Okay.
Everyone said at that time they didn't wish to be videoed. As Rosa Saccharin said, I'm an old woman and I don't want to appear in video. She changed her mind later on.
Okay. And can I ask you, because you said the agency was important, meaning control of the material. So once you had the recording, did you then show it back to the person or the transcript, or how did that process work? Because, I'm very aware of this is an important topic. And, for the big archives, the giving back of the interview was important. But then, of course, at that point, it was often too late to change anything.
We were very lucky, and that sounds awful, but they were still around for us. So what happened was we did the interview, we passed it over to Duncan Cameron, and at the same time we applied for a larger grant. So we applied for a large grant from Heritage Scotland and also from various community trusts, because we realized this is much bigger than we think it's going to be. And we started going, let's go for an exhibition and let's do this and let's do some exciting things with computing students. And so the application just grew arms and legs and was huge by the time we went in. But big mistake, we didn't apply for nearly enough money. So that's a lesson I would pass on to other people, is always apply for much more than you think you're going to need, because you do need it. And we were very lucky in the support we got from the local communities. But so Duncan Cameron rightly charged us for doing the editing because it took a long time. So we would do the interview went to the recording studios, and he would edit it only to the extent of taking extraneous noise out. For example, we interviewed Howard Zingerman's mother in the nursing home, and she was attached to a machine to help her breathe, which was incredibly noisy. He eradicated the whole background noise.
So you had sound editing afterward, but not the interviews were not edited, the
He
content.
didn't interview the content. That wasn't up to him to do. And also I would say that he does recording for BBC, so it's at the top quality. We were extremely lucky, which we didn't know was important at the time because we were amateurs.
And then can I just ask you something else about, because you said the Scottish aspect was important. So in terms of methodology, how do you think, what was your methodology and how different was it? You said 2012, so people, the Shaw Foundation had interviewed, some people were for refugee voices, some people had given interviews. How different was your methodology in terms of the approach when you were going out? What did you want to collect?
We wanted to collect their story from the before the war, during the war, after the war, and immigration, settling in, and reflection. So we had it divided into sections, and they knew in advance that's what we were going to cover. So it was up to them whether they wished to talk about it or not. They also, I actually just remembered, we had joint meetings with Newcastle and Edinburgh once a year, and sorry about this, but I think it was AGR, but I may be wrong.
Go on.
At the time, somebody came up and said, we've carried out these fantastic interviews. And it was actually quite funny because most people, not saying everybody, but practically most people in the room said, nobody's interviewed me. So we interviewed people who had never been interviewed. There are, as you know, some people in the community who have sadly passed away who were very comfortable about being interviewed. My mother-in-law, we never interviewed my mother-in-law, but my mother-in-law was interviewed by Radio Clyde at the time of the Garden Festival in 1988. And we found the cassette tapes in her house after she died, and we managed to put these up on the website, so we didn't interview her. So that's a side part.
Amazing. But Angela, do you feel, because I think
we also took a transcript. So the interview was carried out, and at the same time we did a transcript, because what we also found is that people didn't like listening to their voice. They got quite upset about it, but they were happy to read the transcript and they could then change it. This was good, and it was also not so good, because we ended up re-interviewing people. And one person we interviewed 3 times because they had to agree to the interview. They signed a form saying that it would be used for educational purposes, that it would also, extracts of it would remain in the Scottish Jewish Archive Centre, and it would not be used for any other purpose apart from educational purposes. You know, so you wouldn't have to, again, this fee aspect. The other thing I was just going to say was, one of the gentlemen we interviewed, Bob Cutner, said, oh, you know, I really want to sort of say about my work as a spy, when I was a spy during the war, and what I did, you know, just after the war. And it was kind of quite complicated. And when I mentioned to Duncan Cameron, he said, oh, rather than him doing it, you doing it in the house, bring him into the studios and we can edit it at the same time. So we did that. He gave Bob Cutner a bottle of wine, and the other 9 other interviewees heard about this and said, we want to be re-interviewed in the studio because Bob's been interviewed in the studio. There was no reason for them to be re-interviewed, but the women all got flowers and the men all got a bottle of wine, and they loved coming into the studio, and they said, we now know it's professional because you're doing it in a studio.
But, you know, it raises also a question, because obviously, you know, once you're in the studio and editing, then in terms of oral history, it changes something, you know. And I'm curious, when you send people the transcript and they didn't like something, then what would you do? If you can't change the first recording,
Yes, you can. We then recorded it. So I've actually, the original recordings we still have, but the agreement was they would decide what they wished up to be put up. And that's the thing you have to accept about oral history. It's their memories. So it isn't accurate. And I accept that. And
Correct, but so the recordings, so just for the record here, so the recordings, for example, the recordings which we will, I don't know whether we will have your actual recordings on the test on this portal or the link to it, but those are the actual recordings with people signed off, or did they? Right, so they're already cleaned up. If somebody wasn't happy with it, you took it out.
Yes, they would say they took it out. The
So
only
it was edited. So I think that's very important
absolutely.
methodologically. That is the kind of co-authored text, which gave a lot of control to the interviewees, which means we changed the original recording. So that's really, I think, important and maybe different. So for example, it is different from Refugee Voices, where on the whole, we have not done that. Or if somebody was unhappy with something, we have done a very, very minor things, but on the whole, it's not possible to re-edit.
You said that from the beginning, because they had been, because sometimes people say things. For an example, one of our interviewees, I'm not sure whether this is a technical term or not, slagging off, started slagging off members in her family.
So libelous issue content.
Yes. And we said to her, do you really want that up in the public domain? And she said no. And so we took it out. So that was dramatically changed. And I know that one of the interviewees said that he was in one place during the war and simultaneously in another place at the same time, but he wished it to be left in, and it's left in. And that is the thing about oral history. So I have written some articles about oral history, which if you can't sleep at night, you're welcome to have a read about. But oral history, we have to accept. And the other thing I would say is they are talking about memories. For some of them, they were 7 years of age.
Yeah.
So it is going to be inaccurate. It's more about how they experienced what they experienced. And we also spent a lot of time on what they did when they came to Scotland.
Yeah.
And they loved that. They loved that. And we were very lucky because they trusted us, and they said that. Some people we interviewed had never told their testimony before, but they said, we trust you to reflect our testimony as we wish it to be reflected. And not everybody we've interviewed, by the way, has been Jewish. And our name got passed around, and we had some incredible stories. For example, Saskia Teep contacted us and said, I want to talk about my mother. And I wrote back and said, well, actually, we don't have very much money, and we're volunteers, and we're only interviewing first generation. And she said, oh, I was born in the last DP camp in Nuremberg. And she actually suffered because her grandmother was baptized Catholic, but was still regarded as Jewish. And so the effect on the whole family. So she has written a book, but her testimony was amazing. And she's only 2 years older than me.
Yeah.
And she was born in Nuremberg. So absolutely incredible. So every single interview we've done has been so different. And I'm still interviewing.
So how many, Angela, how many are there in your collection?
We have over 50 interviews.
50.
50. And then later on, we got to know somebody who was a professional video recorder, film recorder. And he said, would you like me to come and do some video interviews? And some of the refugees said, yes, we would like to be videoed, because we want to appear now on the screen. So some of the people we've done audio have done video interviews as well.
Okay, so out of the 50, how many are audio and video?
We have up about 15 videos, and some of them are not done by us. Recently, last year, I interviewed a gentleman who gave me a video interview of his mother that was carried out by a school. So they've come from different ways. You asked me, you were also going to talk about, the other thing I should say about our website is we also decided it was going to be educational. And because of my contacts in the university, we started doing some unusual things. So I remember attending a meeting in Yad Vashem and showing our prototype of two computer games that we'd come up with, and showing it to one of the people from, well, showing it to people from Yad Vashem and also showing it to people from the Washington Holocaust Museum, where we're going, oh my goodness, that is incredible. And that was in 2014, because the university was involved in doing game jams, which is you set all the students 40 hours to come up with an idea for a game. And we gave them the task of them to come up with an ideas for games for gathering the voices. And at the end of the 48 hours, the students showed their ideas to our interviewees, who I have to tell you were not happy initially.
No, so that's my question. How did your interviewees think about this testimonies being used in a game?
They absolutely loved it because they were incredibly sensitively done. And also had a huge afternoon tea. That is the last time we had large numbers attending. We had 100 people came, including family members, and the principal toasted, gave the afternoon tea. And out of that, we picked two ideas to take further. One was based on a gentleman called George Taylor arriving in Glasgow, and he went to the wrong station to meet his mother. And it was all about the different people he met in Glasgow. And it was done by two Polish students. And the other one was the first example of Marion's journey. And we then gave those two groups of students money, and they made two prototypes of games, which was great. And much later down the line, we've also redone Marion's journey. And Marion Camras, I'm very pleased to say, lives around the corner from me. So they loved it. And we've got some wonderful photographs of the interviewees sitting beside students, looking at them, their ideas on the screen. But yes, you're quite right. They were very nervous about it, very nervous.
So this is really about the next stage, or the stage of how to use it. And we'll come back to it at the end.
Yeah. And we also did a huge mobile exhibition, which is going to be at the IHRA meeting in June in Glasgow.
The IRA meeting, yeah.
IRA meeting, which I can't pronounce, obviously. And that has travelled all around Scotland. So I can confidently say that gathering the voices, we do speakers from the six of us. Generally is Stephen and Howard. And the mobile exhibition has been all around Scotland, which is quite amazing, actually.
Fantastic. Now, Angela, that's why it's great that we're talking to you, because obviously this portal is going to be launched at the Glasgow meeting, the IRA, under the chairmanship of the United Kingdom. So I think that's why it's very important that we're starting with you as a Scottish project, which leads me to the next question. How important is the Scottish aspect of your collection? And did the interviewees feel that their stories had partly been not recorded because they were in Scotland? Do you see what I mean? Is that important?
I think that's a very good question. And I think you're right. I think that was the aspect. And no matter, I'm not criticising the rest of the UK at all, but people in Scotland felt that they weren't really regarded as important. And I get that. We're a much smaller community. Yeah. But I would say that I serve on an international committee attached to the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure because of how we have gone around our website. Our website has thousands of followers, and because we are constantly looking at different ways of engaging with the next generation. So we are doing digital comics, and we're doing another digital comic project starting next year using Suzanne Ullman's story, testimony, who survived in the cellars in Budapest throughout the war. So, I mean, each testimony is so different, and it's quite incredible. And we have built up a reputation for trying out different innovative educational approaches. And we can do it, I think, because we're a small group and we don't have to account to various other bodies. And I have to say, because we have an amazing support via the university, even when they leave the university, they're still dragged into assist. So we are very lucky. However, there are only 3 couples and I'm the youngest. So we have to think about the future of the project. So at the moment, I'm in discussion with the National Library of Scotland, who has taken some of our material, but we're looking at, more of the website going to be embedded into National Library of Scotland. And they got a grant for doing lots of whole video project on refugees. So just now I'm arranging for our videos to be captioned professionally. And that's a big job, and we're actually getting somebody in to do it. The other thing I was going to say as well is that I've sent down the database that I did for the portal.
Yeah.
I've actually passed the Wiener library so that stuff can go in there. So we are looking at the future because we're not always going to be around.
Yeah, but I think, Angela, there are two
some of
different things.
our members, our 6 of us, are going to be 80.
Yeah.
So we have to think about what's going to happen to our website.
I think there are 2 things, isn't it? It's the interview collection and the website with two different things.
Except they're in there, and also we have all the educational material as well. We've did a 2-year project with Poppy Scotland, so we have lesson plans in the website. The website is not just our interviews; it's lots of educational approaches as well.
So do you think, in terms of, because that's going to come up, about the ethical usage of interviews, for you, having interviewed and knowing the refugees, do you think there is something which you would clearly say, no, we cannot use this material for that, So you say educational computer games, lesson plan. Is there anything you say this is not appropriate? Or do you see what I mean? Any medium. So we're thinking of for the future,
medium.
what sort of medium do you think, or would you say, put it the other way around, that if it's done properly, it should be judged in a way on its own merit, case by case?
I think we're all aware of this, with TikTok and X, whatever he's now calling it, because he's changed his name again.
Yeah.
Facebook, whatever. So I serve in 2 groups. I serve on the international, the Archive Specialist Group, which is run under the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure. And we discuss a lot about the ethics in that group. And also I'm part of the Digital Holocaust Memorial Group, which is Vicky from Sussex University, was the one who kind of set that up. And it's funny you say that, because we have just finished doing guidelines on computing games and the Holocaust. So these guidelines are about to be published in the next month, I think, actually. I think it's not a question of the medium, it's a question of the people who are using it. And there will always be people who do use things inappropriately. I don't think it's just with us. I think it's an international problem. So it's about combating it, I think. So, for example, at the moment with what's happening in Israel, I was asked whether I would give a talk about the Israeli Gaza situation, because I'm, because of being involved in gathering the voices. And I said, I do not link the Holocaust with this. And I'm very determined to say that. And I've said that publicly as well. And I think that's the kind of thing, it's just more politics, and the Holocaust, it's a big issue. And I think looking at other groups that I follow, and who follow us on Twitter or whatever, it's seeping in, and that's quite difficult. And in LinkedIn as well, it's kind of seeping in. So that more concerns me than different medium. I do think unless we collaborate with younger generations, and I've written a few papers about that as well, then we will not be able to pass on education about the Holocaust. And so for us as a small group, we constantly work with younger generations. So Matty and Thomas, who developed our last game, they're in their 30s. And that's a group I want to kind of be much more involved with for our future for Gathering the Voices, because we're old and, you know, we have to look at different ways of engagement, and it's worked. So I had a school up in Scotland that developed its own small little game, and it was wonderful, really wonderful. But I think there's, I think there's a lot of respect for our material. And I've just finished, and I just had the biggest compliment today. People are going around, obviously, you know, promoting their party for the oncoming election.
Yeah.
Person who came to the door had just finished at Glasgow University, and I said, oh, but because I always mention Gathering Voices, I take cards with me wherever I go.
Yeah.
And she said, oh, you came and talked to our school, and it made such an impression. Do you know, we did a visit to Germany the following year to find out more. And I thought, that is it. I thought, wonderful. And I'm so...
That's a legacy, a good legacy to have.
Wonderful legacy. And I'm so pleased for some of the people we interviewed. There was a lady we interviewed, it was very moving, in a nursing home. She had dementia. The social worker from AGR came with me. It was a wonderful interview. And this lady said, I didn't do anything. And I said, you did. She was a single parent. She was married to an abusive man. She brought up 5 children on her own in Glasgow, and she was a peddler, and that's how she earned a living. And I talk about her a lot when I tend to do the university students.
Yeah.
Because there's still this aspect of everybody who's Jewish is wealthy, and it was all came easy. And that is a wonderful example.
Of a marginal story, isn't it? Or somebody who's not represented.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of the people we've interviewed were they said to me, we're just ordinary people.
Yeah.
And for some of them, most of them said, I won't give another interview. It's the only time they gave us an interview. It was a real honor, real honor.
And I mean, it also shows that it's not a question of quantity, isn't it? Because the material is so rich that you can do a fantastic website with 20 interviews, or because each life story is so full.
Absolutely. And each one is just so different and so unique, and their perspective and how some people had come to terms with it, what happened to them and their family, others didn't. Yeah. And some people are still finding out. So I'm going to be interviewing someone in the community because he's trying to find out, it's complicated, but what it's to do with a Torah scroll that is in his family. And I'm really pleased because up until a few years ago, I don't think he would agree to me interviewing him. So we're still, as I said, carrying out interviews, some now with second generation.
Angela, I wanted to ask you, I mean, you've talked about some of the stories. What are your personal highlights of the Gathering the Voices collection?
Actually, my personal highlight is the lady who was a peddler. I just think what a brave lady. Really, so it's the ones who I regard as the unsung heroes.
Yeah.
The other person I talked about, which I talk about a lot, Suzanne Ullman. Suzanne Ullman turned up at an AGR meeting, and she only joined it, I think, about 3 years before she died, and agreed for us to interview her. The interview was amazing, but throughout the interview, she never mentioned that she was a devout Catholic. And we only found it out when she died, and we were asked to attend her mass. So something, you know, so deeply important to her, she didn't actually mention. But as I said, one of our aims is always to involve young people. So as well as working at Glasgow Caledonian University, I also supported students in the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, music and drama. And so students there decided that they wanted to get involved with Gathering Voices, and we did a happening. So that involved working with a primary school, St Oswald's, which has more than children who come from about 30 different countries as asylum seekers, refugees. And we did a happening based on an interview with Dorit Sim. And Dorit Sim learnt English by following a comic called The Beano.
Yeah.
And so it was she had very interesting vocabulary, zooks and various words like that. And so what these students did with the pupils was they asked them to come up with 100 words that they really liked and they thought was important to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And they did a whole musical thing about it, and we performed it in front of all the parents and invited guests in the city chambers in Glasgow. And then we also asked Suzanne Oman and Rosa Sakharine and her husband and Helena Brannan to come, just whoever was available, who are all first generation, to come and listen to the happening in the school. And Dr. Suzanne Oman talked to these children. From all of them, English was their second or third language. And in fact, some of them had interpreters beside them because
Right.
they recently arrived in Scotland. And she said she arrived in Britain. She couldn't use a knife and fork. She was a feral child. She couldn't communicate with her parents who had remained in Britain throughout the war. They'd come over to do business and didn't go back to Budapest. And she was stuck in Budapest with two younger brothers. And she was totally wild and had lots of issues. And she became a lecturer at Glasgow University. And she said, I can do this, you can do this. And I thought, what an inspirational lady. So just wonderful. And the following week, she suddenly died.
Mm.
So these are a couple of my favorites. A very private lady, but just quite remarkable. And some of them were just amazing, you know, particularly ones who said, I didn't do anything. And I said, you did, you brought a family up, you know, you did. So just fantastic.
And do you feel that just by recording them, that was important in a way to acknowledge that the act of recording is important?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And certainly the people I've talked about, they're always so impressed. And when the Beaner came up to Glasgow, as you know, sort of, which was lovely, and there was a few people from the Jewish community came and to hear me, and they said, "Oh, we'll know who you're talking about." And I said, "I guarantee you will not know a single person that I'm going to talk about." And they said they didn't. So there's this impression that most people, a lot of people we interviewed, including my mother-in-law, didn't mix with the Jewish community.
Yeah.
My mother-in-law by chance married somebody Jewish, but she never mixed with the Jewish community. She was dragged into it when I married her son and didn't feel comfortable about it.
Right.
And came to a talk. We dragged her into the AGR. She was involved in SAROC before. I don't know if you've heard of SAROC.
No.
We talk about in our website, which was started off by Rosa Sakharine, and particularly for people who came over in the kinder transport and came to school. So she did a lot of work with that. Rosa did. But she listened to somebody else giving a talk about their childhood and only discovered then that this gentleman who gave the talk, she was in the same year as him in Germany and in Austria, I mean.
Well, you know, this raises the whole question about how we find interviewees. And of course, that people who are, let's say, within a community are more likely to talk or to interview rather than the people who are outside the community or in a different community on the fringe. And I have to say, I completely agree with you. For me, it's very satisfying to be able to record somebody who is really, you know, I interviewed somebody who came on the kinder transport, lives on Ledbury, has never met any other kinder, or is not interested really to meet other kinder. Lives a very, you know, normal life, very English, has never looked for this company of other refugees, but now was willing to talk. And I think that is important and an important part of the story.
And the other thing I was going to say is I interviewed somebody in Dundee who isn't Jewish at all, whose mother fought for the resistance movement, and a very interesting story. She hasn't given her permission for it to go up because she wants to change bits of it. She's a very elderly lady. And this is because she came from Poland and she's worried that her family remaining in Poland will be affected by her testimony, which won't happen, but I respect that. So I have visited her 3 times in Dundee, and we've gone over backwards and forwards over her testimony. But she hasn't given permission for it to go up, so it hasn't gone up.
No. I mean, there's another whole issue about permissions and what, you know, what is also the issue of informed consent. That's something which is important for me now, because, you know, we've started sharing Refugee Voices interviews on social media, but in a very curated way. But of course, you know, we started interviewing in 2002. There was no social media, so nobody could consent to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's a very complicated question. Making these judgments, and who is making those judgments, you know, what is appropriate and what's not. And that links me to my next question. Do you think it's important for Gathering the Voices that there were so many second generation involved? Do you think that's an important factor for a project like that?
I think it was just how it came about, actually. So I am uncomfortable about second and third, and my husband is more uncomfortable about it, actually.
Tell me why.
Because it's not their lives. I wouldn't, you know, sort of I grew up with stories from for example, my father, I don't know really what happened to my father. All I know is he was sent over to South Africa at 14. He joined the army to escape from his uncle's farm. He hated working on it. He served in the army from 16 to 21. Lots of issues going on there. I can't really talk about it because I'm not him. And so it's only the very small amount that I know that he's told me. So we have to be careful about distortion as well. And also, and I get this, every person we have interviewed, and you've had this as well, nobody is ever going to turn around and say, I was a horrible person. So it's, you know, it's people will say to you what they want you to know about them.
Sure.
And we understand that. If you go down to the second generation, they'll change it a bit as well. They're not going to kind of pass that. So we have to be careful.
But this is about, you know, second and third generation as interviewees. But what I was thinking about is second generation as sort of memory keepers, as creators of the project for the first generation.
I think creators of the first generation,
Yeah.
I get that. Yes, we have to, because most of them have passed away. But we're of an age now that we're, however, my children are not wanting to get involved, and it's up to them. And in fact, of all the 3 families, none of the next generation want to.
That's interesting.
Not that they will say it, you know, to people. It's not that they want to disguise it, but they don't want to go around talking about it and whatever. But they will use our website, and they will tell people about our website.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is wonderful.
No, because, you know, when looking at testimony collections, I think that we can say that the survivors and refugees often themselves, you know, were responsible for creating many of it. For example, Fortune of Archives was started by survivors.
Yes,
so
yes.
I have a feeling that's, you know, that in a way the second, third generation played an important role in creating more projects, you know.
Yeah. And the thing is that people we interview, and we're still interviewing, they always practically say the same thing. I don't think what I'm going to tell you is very interesting.
Yeah.
Why would you be interested? Because, and it's not negating, but a couple of people from Scotland, as you know, did a huge amount, which is fantastic. So others felt, why would you want to hear about I just, you know, I'm an ordinary person. But they are ordinary, extraordinary. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And in terms of Angela, and then I have just a few more questions for you. in terms of the refugee experience and the survivor experience, how did that, was that important, or how in gathering the voices, or?
What do you mean by the refugee?
The refugee, I mean, the, you know, the people who came before the war and the survivors who came after the war.
Ah, right. So you're talking about those who came through kinder transport?
Yes.
And most of people we've interviewed came in the kinder transport. We had a few that we called survivors, and that's why we've called them all interviewees or refugees from the Holocaust, because they didn't want to be differentiated either. So what was your first question?
No, so, you know, I'm very aware of, for example, just the terminology, you know, is, you know, we are, for the portal, for example, we're using, I think we're talking about refugees and Holocaust survivors. And at some point, you know, some of the refugees or kinder transports, they didn't see themselves as survivors. At this point now,
Right,
they might see themselves as survivors. So it's an interesting.
Yeah, we've called them all interviewees. And funnily enough, one of the interviewees said that somebody else had said to this person, you never suffered, you weren't in the camps. So there was a kind of, which I have to say hasn't been with the people we have interviewed, and we've interviewed a lot of people, but initially there was this thing of level of suffering. But I think we have made sure that that isn't appearing, that aspect in the,
Yeah.
And we have had some wonderful things as well. We had a gentleman, Moniek, who sadly has passed away, who thought he was the only person to have survived in his family. And thanks to Michael Tobias coming and talking to AGR and listening to the interview as well, an AGR meeting, Michael tracked down other members of his family.
Oh, fantastic.
But they had thought that Moniek had died and put up a memorial to him. So amazing. And found each other in there, and he was in his 80s. I mean, so I think these are the things that make, I think, gathering the voices really so special. And people like Saskia as well, because nobody had ever heard of Saskia, and what happened to her. And also, she came over with her mother, who was German, who was treated horribly when she came to Britain and was regarded as a Nazi when she wasn't. So kind of not only did she suffer in Germany, but she also suffered when she came to Britain as well. So yeah, and the other thing was, I was going to say, is in one of my interviews, I asked this person why this refugee, the interviewee, left the family who had sponsored her. And she said that the person came into her bedroom and she didn't want the wife to know. And she named the family that had brought her over. And so I took the name of the family out, but I've left that in. And I thought, nobody will know who it was, but I feel it gives recognition to what happened to her. And I think that's important as well, is that sadly, not everybody we interviewed had a wonderful time when they came.
No. And just the topic of, you know, sexual exploitation and things, you know, abuse are topics which are in the archive, in all our archives, and certainly need attention, but needs also sensitive handling.
Yeah. So we do have PhD students who have used our material.
Yeah.
One of them, Emily Smith, is talking next week about refugee experience in Scotland, and it's people we haven't interviewed. So which is fantastic. And she has talked to a lot about, she was looking at from to do with World Jewish Relief, and she's been looking, her PhD is on that topic. And so we do have PhD students who use our interviews as well, which is great.
I'm also thinking there's, of course, more content. For example, in Refugee Voices, people who had a Scottish experience but didn't end up living in Scotland. You know, I'm thinking of a lady called Eve Jill, who went to Scotland and stayed with a Jewish family and had an absolutely terrible experience. And the lady, she decided to leave. She couldn't stand it anymore. And the lady refused to give her suitcase and complained to the Home Office. And it was only after weeks that she was managed to get her suitcase, the only suitcase she was able to bring. You know, but they never didn't settle in Scotland. So, which is an interesting.
Yeah, and we've got a lady who went back to live in Germany.
Right. Yeah.
And we have somebody who emigrated and went to live in Canada. So I suppose it's just how people have contacted us and how we've kind of got to know. And as I said, they're still popping up. Ian Fulton, I had an interview with him 4 or 5 months ago. I met him when the Wiener came up, and it turned out that his knew nothing about his parents, and his father was a professor in the university, which I worked in. Never knew.
So, Angela, thank you for giving us a fantastic taster, I think, of the archive. That was the purpose of this conversation. I just want to finish up with one last question. So people will come to our site and now will be able to watch the Gathering the Voices or listen to the Gathering the Voices interviews. What is your hope for somebody who will come and visit this site, which features so many different interviews?
I would hope that they would look at the rest of the site as well, because I recognize the portal. You know, it's fantastic what you've done, but there's lots more things on our website as well as interviews, such as, you know, the series narrative computer game that has gone up last year, and also the new stuff that we've done with Poppy Scotland. So we're constantly adding. We also have a timeline on our website as well. So if you go into the timeline, you can then from there go into someone's interview that matches up with what we're talking about in the timeline. So we have a lot more on our website than just the interviews.
So you want people to click through and really find out more, which of course they will be able to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And happy to, as the portal expands, for more of our stuff to kind of go into it.
Yeah, there's also, if you have
it took me a long time to put things in, not being as computer literate probably as I should be.
The metadata, it's the metadata of the interview.
The metadata, exactly.
The metadata. Okay. Okay, Angela. So I'm going to switch off the recording. Thank you so much for sharing those details and your reflections on the archive. And I hope there will be more possibilities to share, you know, experiences, and hopefully there will be more, you know, in terms of maybe a forum or discussions or things like that to do with oral history and testimonies.